What is up, everybody? My name is Richard Terrell, and I go by Kirby Kid. You are watching the weekly recap of our design topics of the week. In our Discord community at Design Oriented, we talk about game design 24/7. And one thing that we started doing somewhat recently is to give you guys design challenges every day. Every day, Monday through Thursday, Monday through Friday, something a little special for the weekend. But we do encourage everyone, and you should be thinking about design just about every day. So on the Sundays like this, we do a recap or a weekend recap, a recap of all of the lessons learned, people who participated, and kind of leave everybody off with a nice little summary in case people need to be caught up. So that's what we're doing today, and the theme of the week was enLIGHTen. As you can see here on the screen, enLIGHTen is a video game that I created, and it is a game about learning. Learn the art of learning. It's a puzzle game that will guide you on a journey to learn how you learn. Each puzzle requires turning off a 5x5 grid of light switches. The twist is each light switch also toggles its neighbors. In Zen fashion, you will find yourself reflected in the simplicity of puzzle solving. So we're gonna take a look at that. We had a bunch of people play the game. Some people for the first time ever. Some people were veterans, and I had a little treat for our veterans. For the people who are used to the base game, which as you can see here is very, very blue, I created this other version of the game, which as you can see here is very, very gold, and we call that enLIGHTen Gold. So if you ever hear the word gold or whatever throughout this broadcast, just know that this is what we're talking about. There's a really cool difference, but I'm not going to share that with you now. We're going to go and look a little bit back right now at the vanilla version and look at some player stats. But before we do, I got Marcus on the mic. Anything you want to say to introduce everyone to today's discussion topic?
This is mostly your baby. I am a person. Willing participant. So I have my own story that I'll tell later.
Okay, and you at least posted all the challenges. So I'm going to Discord. We're going to do this and open in the browser. Cool, don't look at that. Okay. Watching anime, everything else, daily challenges right here. So daily challenges, enLIGHTen week. Look at the beautiful image created by Bleach. But it's essentially enLIGHTen week. The first day we played it. The second day we played it some more. Marcus provided us with some questions like, did you beat the game? Keep playing it. Share some interesting notes of things you've solved. Share an interesting note of a puzzle you didn't solve. What modes helped you? Just get talking about the game, right? Get excited, as we like to say. Third day, Master Junior. You share your thoughts about the experience, and in general, we wanted to get people talking about how the game encouraged them to keep playing, how the Discord community that we surround the game with, right? Everybody playing all week, people playing on our Discord stream, and me streaming that to Twitch. So there's a bunch of VODs now of people playing the game. We want to know if that helped. We want to know if people shared more with each other because they saw everybody playing. And if somebody helped you along the way, give them a shout out. If you start to see enLIGHTen puzzles in your dreams, tell us about that too. Can you feel the cosmos? Let's see if this girl can feel the cosmos.
Oh, I feel it. I feel the cosmos. Cancer came scuttling back.
Oh,
So yummy.
Nice. So, and then the fourth day, to infinity and beyond. One of the challenges was, okay, this is Thursday's Thanksgiving. Don't worry too much about playing, but if you want to listen to this YouTube video of the chess grandmaster playing people online and talking about his thought process, you can watch that video and then draw comparisons to your experience playing enLIGHTen. That was a lot of fun. And then Friday we offered this cheat sheet where I give people an annotated, time-stamped walkthrough of some of the things that I felt was most interesting about it. So, enLIGHTen is a crazy game. I started working on it 4.5 years ago. And it's been a super long journey. Worked on it for about 2 years straight, then moved to Austin. Put the project down for about 2 years, and now it's just kind of clawing back at it a little bit just to see what's up. But throughout the entire experience, I've been playing the game watching my friends play a game, talking to them about learning, and really getting to see everybody grow and in this one particular, often rarely touched aspect of their lives. So learning how you learn is a big deal, and I'm just going to start grabbing some here data from different people. Beta 7. This is the original version. This beta is open online if you want to play it yourself. If you do, let me know. If you stream it, let me know. If you like it, let me know. If you hate it, really let me know. That kind of a thing. Here's the game running, and I'm just going to run it like this. This is my master file, and the first person we're going to look at, let's listen to that music for a little bit. I can feel it. I can feel the cosmos. Where is my uploads? So the story is, I started this crazy journey by playing this game, or playing lots of puzzle games and realizing that other people do not enjoy puzzle games nearly as much as I do. So I wanted to create an experience that helped them see what I see in puzzle games. And really it just started with me finding a tutorial on how to create this game that you see here, Lights Out, in GameMaker. And GameMaker is the only engine, the only platform I know. So it was a really good start for me to jump in and get my feet wet. But from there I learned basically everything that I know about scripting and coding, and coded one feature at a time, one Google search at a time, and asking Marcus a bunch of questions about what local variables were to get to this point. But every time I could dream up a feature, I made it, I put it in, I tried to incorporate it. So the end result is really complex. There's a lot to it. I did a lot to try to ease people into the experience, but there's really there's not a lot of familiarity with playing a game that's half a lecture and half a game at the same time. As you can see, there's a lecture hall and lots of things to listen to as you play. So with that said, we had a lot of people play the game, and let me just go ahead and take a look. So James played. We're just gonna take a look at James's stats real quick, and I have a built-in friend feature where I can do something like this, and it can load up some stats for us, and we can take a look at it. And I'll just cut the music off. Cool. So yeah, James played a little bit, right? You can see this tiny green line is James and his progress. Played roughly 20 puzzles. Just dabbled his feet in the game. So there's not really much more you're going to see with his stats, but one thing that this game does is it tracks your stats over time, so you can see how you changed over time, which is more important than, if you got there. This is about the journey and not the destination. So I'm going to load up another player. Marcus played a little bit. Should we save you for last?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll go with Alan. Alan was a player that wanted to play the game for a while. Finally found some time to play it during enLIGHTen week, so that was really cool. Got to chat with him in voice chat for the first time, but he played the entire game on stream on Twitch the other day, and you could see his entire process going from I know nothing about this game to learning about its features, its modes, and kind of getting into the swing of things. So while he didn't have this mode unlocked on his, he spent about an hour and 10 minutes, right, easing into the puzzles, perfecting some but not all of them, and making his way forward in the game, right? That's another quick example. What's interesting about what did he unlock? What's interesting about watching Alan play was you could see him thinking as he played. You could see, once you're a little bit more familiar with the game, you can see that certain heuristics pop up in people's brains, and you can see them actually using it. They just may not be aware of what they're doing, but as an experienced player, And as somebody who's been tuned to be ultra sensitive to learning tips and tricks and habits and signposts and red flags, it's really interesting watching somebody's brain kind of work its way out on the screen. This is Jess. Jess, yay! Thank you, Jess, for playing my game and giving it such a thorough thrashing. Jess's hour count is currently at, it should be at, let's see. Her hour count is at 44, right? All the way up there. I've been playing the game for a long time, a few months, April, May, since May, June, July, August, September, October, November. So it's half a year, right? And you can see everything that is highlighted in blue. That's her color here. And it's really cool seeing the stats like this because you really start to see differences in people's play experience. And my line right here is gold, but you can kind of ignore that because it's the 5th or 6th time I played through my own game. But you can see how it can create a point of comparison when playing, right? How perfecting the puzzle trails solving it, right? Solving got to 100 puzzles right here. 100 puzzles roughly at 15 hours, but at 15 hours only 67 were perfected, and then how it kind of follows up at the same rate that the puzzles did, right? Roughly. Blinding, people unlocking blind mode and then kind of going to town. The rate at which these puzzles are blinded is pretty constant, just chipping away at it every day. That's cool. Shapes added, nothing. But yeah, the whole challenge of the game is to reach mastery and enlightenment. And by listening to the lectures, by paying attention, by doing stuff, you get scored on these 5 different categories. And each one goes up to 100% for 100% total. And once you get 100% enlightenment, you're supposed to have a really good understanding, or at least been exposed to a really good way to learn. And mastery is the hard part. You got to actually do really well on the daily challenges and a couple of other important things in order to prove that you have this highly flexible competency when playing this game. So as you can see here, daily scores, right? It goes up and down, and we're ending off at somewhere in the 90s, which is great. Getting above an 85 is really the main goal here. But, between play sessions, doing the daily challenge in hour 12 and then coming back at hour 26, huge gap in there where it didn't want to do daily ones. But you can see, even though the efforts trend upwards, there are some highs and some lows. And I just kind of use these stats to show people that progress isn't as smooth and as straightforward as you would hope. Sometimes people think, yeah, I learn a thing, then I have it in my brain, and then I'll never mess up again, and I'll just keep stacking that up. It's not how it works. Learning is oftentimes requires the reorganization, the recontextualization of information, and that makes these spiky bumps in progress, and you'll probably drop before you rise, and that's why you see a lot of the same kind of what I call the skyrocketing success phenomena in a lot of these scores. Daily 3 is kind of an anomaly. It targets your least seen puzzles, so everything that you are least familiar with. So when you know less puzzles, it's easier to get a higher score, but then as you learn more puzzles, it dips, but then you balance it back out and it evens out. So that's just kind of a fun thing there. But yeah, there's a lot of stats. I look at these stats, I talk to everyone who plays, and I really try to listen to what they say and how they play. It's always those two things put together. When people say that, they did really badly on something, but you see their progress trending up, you gotta wonder, like, do they feel bad, or are they paying attention to something else? And I try to get people to be more conscious of what they say and their good learning habits, and just use the game experience as a common touchstone, as a point of commonality. That's the fun part. So, click keeper tool. Oh, these are my stats. People love the click keeper. Right when they get it, they're like, yeah, I use it every day. And it just explodes. Hidden shape tool people do not use nearly as much. But getting up there, that's quite a lot. That's quite a lot, actually. Wait. Yeah, because I was talking to Jess and I was like, hey, there are times when you're solving a puzzle. This one in particular. And you're solving a puzzle, and if you don't see that there's a T right here and a T right here, it's inside of this bigger shape. Sometimes people just start like chipping away like this and making the puzzle much harder for themselves. That was the theme from Evangelion, Zankoku. What did I click? Yeah, there it is. Zankoku. Anyway. So one of the things that I was working with her and just trying to better understand was some people can see these things way better than others, and some people can't. Some people can memorize the click solutions way better than others, and some people can't. Like, everybody's got these strengths and weaknesses, and the game tries to give people tools in order to help see that. So the hidden shapes in this case is kind of the old-fashioned version, but it tells you there's 4 T's in here. Here's 1, here's 2, here's 3, here's 4. And it's not telling you to click on those. It's telling you, do you even see them in the first place? And can you see inside of what it is? Can you kind of see beyond what's immediately apparent and develop what we call the enlightened eye? Where's our eye? There we go. Stuff like that. So that's an important part of expanding your perception, and when you expand your perception, you cover more ground, you make better tests, you do better trial and error, you learn faster, and you observe better. Like, all that stuff is good. But it's just been really interesting talking with Jess because a couple of reasons. As an artist, she draws from imagination better than she draws from direct reference. And it's very similar to my brother with his art. They're both left-handed too. And there seems to be a really common struggle in how they're learning, that basically they're both hovering at around, mastery level. Jess and Mark's are hovering around like 82% mastery, 83. And you see Jess's stats, she's been roughly at this level for a while. 6 hours. So we're trying to figure out like what happened to make these little spikes happen? What happened to make this steady rise happen, right? And sometimes it's just getting used to the game and playing modes. It's not always just like, oh, your brain, but we're doing the best we can with what we have. Before we move on, the one thing that I love about these graphs is that you can look for correlations. And at one point I had it highlighted in the graph so you could help you see the correlations. But between hours 33 and 39, you can go to any other point in the graph, 33 to 39, right here roughly, and see if there's any other similar changes in activity. So not in puzzle solved, not in perfected, not in blind, and not in added. You move on. Dailies from 33 to 39 steadily increased, but flatlined on 2. Pretty steady on 3, increased in 4, and pretty flat on 5, right? So you're looking for something else, right? Questions answered, flat, and the game, nope, that happened afterwards. And Overwatch tool, flat, relevant, it's probably flat, it's off the top of the screen. Hidden shapes from 33 to 39, you can see a little bit of rise in use, which is interesting compared to the other ones, which were much more flat. Oh, that's mine. This one's down here. No, that's hers. And then a tiny bump in Click Keeper, and nothing there. Flat puzzle, a rise in daily challenges, okay. A slight rise in explore mode, flat note, flat, and slight rise in review. So that's interesting. These don't even have graphs. So yeah, you look at the the data as much as possible. Your whole history is kind of here in one way or another, and then you try to look to see if there's any kind of reason, any kind of moment that you had, an epiphany, or is it some kind of change in your practice, or was it just a steady increase and then you finally got to where you wanted? And at least with this game and by playing it and taking it seriously, you got yourself a little bit of a window to discover those things for yourself. And so I encourage Jess to, or one thing you can kind of clearly see is a lot of people gravitate towards puzzle mode. Where are you? A lot of people spend a lot of time in puzzle mode. They're just like, yeah, puzzles. But the other modes, less explored. Puzzle here is like 7.2 hours. Daily challenges about 4. Explore mode a lot, 25. And then notes 15. Sometimes people put like 35 in the puzzle and then like 2 in all the others, and that's kind of like, okay, maybe you should round out the modes that you spend your time in because they're all important. Next up is Lori. Lori's played for roughly 9 hours, 8 hours. Likes to perfect the puzzles as they go along. Here, blind, flat line. Some spiky action, crazy contraptions, fun to catch in. Right here. Up and downs. And by the way, there's not a drop off here. I just didn't know how to program it to where when there's no more numbers, it just kind of stops here. So it's just like, meh, it goes down to 0. That's fine. 4, flat line, probably just did it once. Completed questions. A spike in interest here, doing the quizzes. So I was like, hey, there's a quiz mode. And a lot of people go, what? And they shoot up. Completed ants, conversations, talking to Richard. They're all optional. So it's interesting to see when people dip into those. Definitely a lot of notes written. That's pretty steep, which is great. Shapes renamed. And so whenever you take too long in a puzzle or you don't score above an 85 in the daily challenges, it forces you to stop, review your work, and then make a note because there's obviously something there you probably should learn from. And that's what happens. That's what these are, stumped responses. Voice color is green, right? Yeah. So you can see here, tackling harder and harder things, there's more and more to take note of. And this correlates with the notes written pretty well. Yeah, sharp increase and, fairly sharp increase. So yeah, pushing yourself to try challenging things and then taking the time to learn from those experiences. We can see here with the review mode, it cut off 3 hours. Is that 2 hours? I think that's 2 hours. 2 hours and 2.23 hours in review mode. And that seems like it's small compared to like 25 hours in explore mode. But if you think about it, after you lose, you're probably least in the mood to kind of dwell on that loss or whatever, that relative loss. And it's just supposed to be like a quick, yeah, I'm done, and move on. But imagine instead of just going like, yeah, and hitting the button, you spent 2 hours, 2.25 hours, like just looking at yourself and reviewing. So that's pretty significant. Total game hours. Wait, that's me. There. Lori, where are your review time? Does that one not even chart? I got the stats mixed up. Okay, so Lori's stats aren't enumerated, but you can see here roughly this much time got put in a puzzle. Daily's just a little. Explore mode a little like dailies, lesson notes, a lot more time put talking to Richard and reading the conversations. Level select, not a lot of time. And then review mode, I think it's a little bit more than level select. But yeah, spending time in this mode here is a really interesting way to learn. So Lori's enlightenment level shot up a few times. So Lori was really big into the lectures, and the lecture is where you learn the most about learning from a conceptual point of view, and you can clearly see the graph trending up here for that. But mastery level, not so much. It's always interesting to try to see, like, when you learn how you learn better, does it actually result in better performance, and when do those things correlate, or when does one affect the other? It's kind of what this graph page is there to show you. We can only look at it one at a time here. But like very, very topped out, very high. I think this is not full enlightenment anyway. But then mastery, something of an increase in between hours 6 and 8. So let's take a look at that. Between 6 and 8, Overwatch tools started to be used. Relevant nodes tool always used. Between 6 and 8, the hidden shapes tool really started to get its use. 6 and 8, click keeper steady use, and flow history a little bit. So roughly between the hours of 6 and 8, 2 new tools were used, and that seems to correlate with this bump right here. Those tools are really powerful in helping you get over or to develop some underutilized skills that are particularly important in the daily challenges. So 6 and 8 improved right there at the end, went down then improved. Flatline. That's interesting though. There's that whole aspect of learning where you are incorporating what you learned, and in doing so you kind of underperform because you are attaching information to old information, and the whole, like, your competency to use your brain requires fast synaptic firing. So when things wire together, they fire together, but when you're adding new things to it, that connection, those associative synaptic connections don't fire the same. So that's why a lot of times people's competencies drop significantly before they shoot back up, because their brain's working on it. They're like, I got it, and then like, this isn't a ton of data points, but you can see this kind of pattern happen a lot. But it's really interesting that it happened between 6 and 8, notably halfway through hour 7.5. This is when the results really started to shine through. But that's cool. Oops. Yeah, it's an interesting game. It's a lot of work, and people really seem to sink into it and kind of find their legs. But yeah, Marcus, is there anything you want to add about this before we move on to gold?
No random thought. I don't know. It doesn't have. It's only tangentially related to enlighten. I think I was talking to you before about what if achievements could tell you more about the player. It's in the development sense, like, I think we talked about this before, like specifically towards Smash Brothers. Like, if you can play this level in like a Mario Bros game, right? It has a certain type of dexterity challenge that if you did something similar in Smash Brothers, you should be able to do this technique, something along those lines. And like looking at those graphs, cool, like you just had a certain graph pattern with different type of graphs, like, you're maybe this type of learner, so let's just throw you in this type of environment real quick with a bunch of other people with similar graphs. You guys should be able to come out similarly, maybe not even like positively, but you should all that's not bad.
Yeah, using data to try to get these unique insights to how we learn. Oftentimes how we learn is just a very inarticulated, private, and oftentimes ignored process of of our culture. So we've been described as having a results-oriented culture. So like, yeah, did you do it? Did you do it? Who cares how you did it? Get it done. And you're like, well, the journey is most of the time that you're going to be spending. So it makes a lot of sense to pay attention to how you get there, and what corners you're trying to cut, because that could come back to bite you. But yeah, definitely trying to give people more verbs, more categories to kind of understand how they learn, and just to see a lot of initial things that our early players had to get over, which is like the fact that the game wanted them to do anything other than play a video game. They didn't want to read. They didn't want to do the lectures. They didn't want to read the notes. They didn't want to use the tools. They didn't want to do anything. But the game lets them do whatever they want. And then when they hit a snag, and I say, maybe you should do the lectures, they're like, and they go back, and then they realize not only is the content in the lecture talking about the stuff that they need to learn, but the tools that you get from doing the lectures reflect that concept, and you get to go apply it and see how big of a difference it makes. And it makes a big difference. And it makes a big difference each and every single one of these things. Yeah. So in light of that, this was just cool video of a chess grandmaster.
Hello everyone, and welcome. This is Daniel.
Hello, Daniel. Daniel, chess grandmaster, playing a rando online, beats the rando down, but more importantly explains the thought process as he's playing. So this is a cool tool that we're working on, and it allows me to timestamp, write some notes, and even add an image. So I'm going to go over some of these, and we'll listen to what he says.
Minute chess game against someone in the beginner/intermediate rating range, and I'm going to talk through my moves very carefully, and I'm going to talk through my opponent's moves and point out the mistakes that my opponent is making, as well as the things that I'm doing in order to, well, hopefully I'm going to win the game.
So I'm going to walk you through my moves and talk through my opponent's moves. I'll point out the mistakes he's making, win the game, and afterwards analyze the game and extract lessons, I guess.
In order to win the game. And afterward, I'll do a quick analysis session and extract a couple of lessons that you can apply.
Cool. So that whole one, the ability to talk about what you can do is a strength, right? Being able to explain what you're thinking, explain what you think other people are thinking, talk about what strategies you could do or will do, all that is power to you. One early thing enLIGHTen tried to get people to do was to talk, to use their language, and that's why taking notes was kind of a big deal. A lot of people said, I don't know what to take notes on. I'm like, you just need to start talking. Like, you are running a dialogue in your head. I just need you to type it out on the screen, kind of a thing. But you can see this grandmaster here is really comfortable talking about it. But the whole idea of analyzing your game afterwards, like that's what the review mode here, screenshot, is all about. Like you got your performance, all your moves, sit down and think about it, right? That's important. Next time step.
Very, very, very carefully and in a detailed fashion, I'm going to talk about every one of my moves, the decision-making process that's leading me to make it.
Decision-making process, leading him to make it. He's going to tell you his thoughts. There's two modes in enLIGHTen in particular, my thoughts and my process, that are particularly designed to do this. And they're at the right side of the triangle. That means they are, you won't be spending the bulk of your time here, but this is where all this hard work gets squeezed down and kind of turns into something actionable, applicable, or useful to you after you do all this stuff. So he's really talking about, having done all this, he's gonna try to give you the distilled pieces, nuggets of knowledge that he generated just by explaining it to you in words, which he can do because he can talk about it in the first place. So it's no coincidence that these things are labeled this.
Opponent opens with 1e4. I am going to open with 1e5, which is my main move. It's also the most popular chess move. It's the king's pawn game. He goes knight f.
So that was an interesting comment. He talks about what his opponent does, has the language to talk about it. He talks about what he does, has language. But not only that, he says, this is my main move. So he's aware of how he plays, his history. And then he also says he's aware of the metagame. It's the most popular move in chess. That's a huge... Like when we talk about mastery in enLIGHTen, mastery, we break it down in these 5 categories. Memorization, like just what stuff you actually have in your head. Heuristical understanding of your stuff. A logarithmic understanding, which is more calculated. It's more robust. It's the rules and things that you can actually apply with consistency. And we talked about experience. You just gotta know and do a lot in order to have more than just the answer. Like masters need more than just the answer. They need to know how you get to that answer. It's helpful to know how other people get to that answer. It's helpful to know how other people fail at getting that answer, and all that comes with experience. We just chalk it up to that. But this last one, cardinal, it's about learning things forward and backwards, up and down, and in and out. And those are common phrases that we use to talk about understanding things, but I define them pretty specifically. And in this case, understanding the meta and being able to go from these very specific kind of terminology to a more general terminology, and then also like explain what's happening overall, is the in and out part of understanding, and not a lot of people have. It's also the experience kind of understanding too. So, but what's cool about enLIGHTen that shows you your own history is that there's a tool that almost nobody uses called flow history, and it shows you when you're connecting the shapes, which I haven't shown off much of the game, but that's just how it is. When you're solving in this game, you can efficiently solve from one shape to get to the other, and the game keeps track of those connections and draws them for you to help you remember what you've done and how to learn and how you can move through the board. These connections are what the flow history is. What you've done, it only shows you connections that you've actually made, and then it also shows you the percentage that you go from one to the other. So I go to katana 80% of the time, and euro 21% of the time. So being conscious of what you've done and then doing something about it is what this tool is trying to help you do, and that's why that reminded me of that from the quote.
He plays bishop b5, which is the Rai Lopez opening, also called the Spanish game.
So he knows multiple names for everything, which is interesting. That just shows the extensiveness of his experience. One thing in enLIGHTen that's cool that I got to do more than anyone else is learn what other people rename the shapes to. So in enLIGHTen, every puzzle has a name, and when you're playing, that name pops up at the top to help you as a mnemonic. And as you're solving, whatever's on the screen pops up with what it is. You can also rename every shape in the game to whatever you think is more interesting. So when other people played, I was like, hey, that's a cool name, and I remember their name, my name, and the other person's name, and just about as much as I can remember. That is a sign of mastery. It's a sign that you are getting the experience, you are memorizing / absorbing the experience. Those are two of the prongs, and the fact that in enLIGHTen Gold, a lot of people discovered this slash shape, and Mark called it force lightning, and then his wife called it slash. It's just really interesting, and now I have both in my head along with my name and all that. So I just thought that was pretty neat.
So he drops his bishop back correctly, and in turn I will simply develop my knight and pressure his pawn on e4. Now once again, I'm not really attacking this pawn on e4.
I like how he said once again twice. It's just when you are aware of your moves and what you're thinking as you play, you can anticipate what you can do or what you may do, and you can also look back and see what you did with absolute clarity, right? So when he says once again, you could just see it in his head where he's like, here's a whole history of stuff, and I said this before, I said it as we moved closer, and I'm going to say it again as we move closer. So in his head, everything's organized. And when you hear people say stuff like this, that means they're aware of the repetition, and the only way you can be aware of the repetition and learning, especially with enLIGHTen, is if you're aware of these chains, and the best way to become aware of these chains is to learn the names. And the difference between somebody using these names and somebody who doesn't. I mean, I don't have a ton of test cases, but the people who don't learn the names don't score beyond like 50 in the daily challenge, right? You absolutely need to start building those connections.
I'm a little bit annoyed by the pressure that the bishop is exerting over the knight. So what I'm going to do is go b5 and chase his bishop away.
So there's some quizzes in enLIGHTen that ask you things like, how do you solve this? How do you solve that? I like that he is talking about his emotional state because it's all included with your learning experience. But I also thought that he has a response to things that annoy him, which is cool. So when the questions in enLIGHTen are like, how do you solve this? Or what happens when you get stumped? If you're more aware of your response, you're more aware of it's just additional power to you, because then you can change it once you're aware of it. If you just go by whatever you feel or react to stuff, you have very little ability to change over time.
Developing a piece, a lot of beginners, they just choose the first square that comes to mind. So they'll develop the bishop here or here, and they won't realize that every development square has its strengths and weaknesses. Now what I'm trying to do is find the most active development square for every piece that I'm developing. When I'm looking at this,
So even though it's a feature that's in the game or in the latest version, not the version you guys can play, there was a version that I had the scripting system, and in the scripting system you could run scripts on the board in order to determine with certainty how to build an AI. So I gave people the ability to scan the board, and you can scan it, and if there's a light, it produces a brighter image here, and if there's no light, it's a dimmer image. And you can scan it up, down, left, right, in and out. You can have extra weight for things that have clusters or less weight for things that have clusters. I made all these options that nobody's ever going to use or know about. But the very process of looking at the board and going, okay, I'm just going to stop and look and evaluate and test a move for its hotness or whatever, as he was saying, like that's a very effective and thorough way of evaluating a board state. And he'll say more about that later. He says later, like, oh, most players just play the first move they see instead of actually thinking about all the moves, and this is what the enLIGHTen tries to help people.
Now, I'm looking at this bishop on c8, and where I'd really like it to go is g4, because I'd like it to pin the knight to the queen. Pins are, a huge asset.
Cool. So he's looking at this board state, and the reason why I chose his screenshot, it's of a daily challenge number 2, which I can show you here. Daily challenge 2 is it takes a puzzle that but messes it up a little bit, right? So this looks like this puzzle here, but it's messed up a little bit, and you have to see the shape. By the way, this shape looks like one of those huge, like, tooth-pulling cartoon gag pliers. But you're supposed to look at it and go, like, how do I get what I want? It requires you to both visualize what you want. It could just be in this orientation. It could be in this one. But you just have to look at it and be like, this is close. I just have to figure out where to click to get it across the border. And it requires you having a target. It requires you knowing and being conscious of that target and making your moves accordingly. Oh, this corner doesn't need to be here. That's interesting. Where are these clicks? So this is a wrench in the bottom, but then we don't have our hole here. This one looks weird. It's probably just that. Cool. So that's what I was talking about here. Like, he sees a scrambled chessboard and he's like, well, I know what I want. And this is exactly why I want it. Again, being very clear about strategies, having names for them, and having reasoning behind those is what the enLIGHTen game tries to get people to develop. When he says pins are a huge asset, pins are basically a hashtag. It's a type of move, it's a type of strategy, and then he has an opinion about that strategy because he uses the language in the first place. You will never get to this level, this grandmaster level of articulation, unless you have strategies, see them clearly, have words for things, and separate those words in your mind, and then have experience to even have opinions on those in the first place. But
I'm looking at this development square for the bishop and saying, well, if I put it there, it's going to be blocked by my own knight. I want to open up the other diagonal for the bishop to put it on g4. Still completely normal, and what my opponent could do here, potentially, is play the move h3 in order to stop my bishop from coming out to g4. This is called prophylaxis, which is a very, very intimidating sounding term until you realize that all that it really means is the stopping of the threats posed by your opponent.
See? So the in and out aspect of mastery requires you to be able to explain things in a highly technical way with specific language and jargon, but also to be able to explain it to a third grader, or what is it, to a third grader, 10-year-old, whatever. So when he's like, hey, look, huge word, it sounds scary, but all it means is stopping people from hurting you before they hurt you. You're like, oh, I get it. He has that level of understanding because he's a master, not the other way around. Or maybe that didn't even matter. But I likened it to an enLIGHTen. Daily Challenge 5 asks you to get to a target. Again, he has a target in mind, but do it in a way to where, I'll show you. Do it into a way where you don't simplify the puzzle at the same time. So if you're trying to make this shape here, it looks like this. All you need is 3 clicks. But if you try to make that puzzle out of this one, you may need to click here and here. But if you simplify it first, it's like, nope, you must rewind turns or reset. Try to solve without simplifying the puzzle in the process. You're like, you need to be able to know how you'll be blocked off and make a strategy that takes that into account, which is just simply rearranging your click order, right? Nothing crazy. Sometimes you'll see clicks that overlap and sometimes you don't. So you're like, well, instead of simplifying it first, I'll just keep that click in my mind and be like, I'll start working on something else, knowing what my destination is. That skill alone throws so many people for a loop, but it's the same skill you see exercised in chess masters and so many other places. It's the ability to have information, to organize it, to tag it properly, to manipulate it, to evaluate it. Like you have goals and you evaluate the path, like this path's not good, this path is good. That's high level Bloom stuff. And it's all encapsulated in one tiny little daily challenge in enLIGHTen, and yet I don't even know what I'm saying yet about this. That's what I wanted to say.
3, and he does allow my bishop to access this very active development square. Now notice how I've positioned all of my pieces on optimal squares.
Notice how I positioned all of my pieces on optimal squares. When you're playing enLIGHTen, you can just solve a puzzle, or you can go back and be optimal about it and get it perfect. It's just kind of like just a way of saying, hey, there's degrees of execution to a lot of stuff. Are you going to be the kind of person that looks for the perfect or the blind and goes beyond, or are you just going to settle with the solve? He's clearly using optimal stuff, which means he's worked on it at some point. He knows what it means to be optimal because he's done it. He's achieved it.
Now, a lot of beginners, they have a tendency when they see a capture to go for that capture. So here I can capture the knight, but that would defeat the whole purpose of what this bishop is doing, which is essentially immobilizing that knight on f3. So I'm just going to drop.
So a lot of beginners just see something and do it. Again, a lot of weak players, weak whatever you want to call it, the reason why they're weak is because they just see whatever they see and do it. And if you play enLIGHTen like that, this daily challenge 1 is just random clicks. A lot of people get pretty far just being like, it looks like a shape. I'll just click the shapes that are dense, right? Here's a dense one, here's a dense one. Yeah, that gets you pretty far until they start overlapping. About halfway through, and you're like, okay, click this one. Okay, click this one. And you're like, oh no. And then they just start doing this. And then they just get lost. Well, yeah, the basic strategy worked for the basic thingies, but as soon as you get more and more complicated, there will hit a point where you have to evaluate this and go, wait a minute. Like, instead of clicking this one, I'm going to click this one, this one, this one, and this one. Like, there's other ways to see, there's other options that are not just on the surface obvious. And the reason why skillful things and hard things can't be done with on the surface obvious things is because then we'd all be skilled. And we're not. Therefore, there's got to be something not obvious about it. Therefore, it must be something that requires extra thought, extra consideration, and that increases complexity. And anytime you increase the complexity, you got to learn it in order to put it in your head. And anytime that's a process, you have more and more chances to learn incorrectly. And that's why highly skilled things are so far away from people. You just can't do it. You can't just give it a bunch of effort. It's not how it works. So when he says a lot of beginners just see a capture and they go for it, a lot of times people have these reflexive tendencies because they can't see ahead. So if enLIGHTen, if you don't know the names of the shapes of the puzzles, I've seen people play like this. Hopefully we got some footage of it too. If people don't know the names of the puzzles, they're just like, and then after some point they're just like, they just start clicking like crazy because they can't see ahead. You can't see ahead unless you use the shape names. You can't see ahead unless you train your brain to see patterns, see puzzles, patterns, possibilities, whatever. And until you do, everything feels like it's like, oh shoot, it's overwhelming. Yeah, this is overwhelming. You got to do the things to break it down, and that's why I just have a note here that says sometimes when you do a standard strategy, it'll get you in trouble, and that's kind of what he's saying here. Like, it's not obvious. Every move you make that's good is not going to be an obvious one.
So this is a very interesting situation that's now arisen. Now, I'm annoyed by the pin, and I'm sure he's annoyed by the pin. The question is, who can get rid of their pin first? Well, I think that person is going to be me. I'm going to do the same thing he did and chase his bishop away and tempt him into taking my knight. He drops his bishop back, and here what I'm going to do is just say goodbye to that bishop. I'm going to play the move g5, attacking the bishop. The bishop has to drop back to the g3 square.
So, when he said, like, who's going to get rid of their pin first, I liken this to the Venn sorter, which is a very underutilized mode in enLIGHTen, but it's only useful if you make hashtags, and it's only useful if you define the hashtags, and it's only useful if you sort out the puzzles that belong in each hashtag. But once you do that, you get to the Venn sorter, and you can ask yourself questions like, which one of these has this quality? Do all the shapes in this group have the qualities of this group? And it sorts it in a very Venn diagram fashion. It's like, why don't I just show you?
Now, you might be looking at
not to take too long, but I will do what I want. Diagonal symmetry. These puzzles have diagonal symmetry. These puzzles are asymmetric. Notice how all my asymmetric puzzles that I have flagged have nothing in common with diagonal symmetry. Maybe there's something about being symmetrical diagonally that prevents a puzzle from being asymmetric. At least the ones I have. The only reason I came up with that thought is because I did this, right? It's not free. None of this is free. None of this is going to be obvious. Pointer. All the puzzles that are pointer also don't have diagonal symmetry, which is interesting. It's starting to make me think. Bring together. Nope. None. The bring together puzzles are not diagonal symmetry, so that means bring together puzzles are puzzles where you just kind of push the lights together at some point, and they go towards each other and they resolve. If diagonal symmetry puzzles have nothing in common with that, that means they always point in a direction, and then they never double back, which is interesting that those have no overlap. So, like, where's our overlap? Diagonals. There we go. These are the puzzles that I feel like have diagonals. These should probably be in the group, but at least we have one overlapping one that is in both groups. Grow tree. Cool. Grow tree, whatever that means, it has this in common with diagonal symmetry. If you ever forget, you go to grow tree. It means vertical lines like bamboo shoots, all with a botanical theme too. Okay, cool. But yeah, that's essentially what the Grandmaster is articulating. Being able to, when we say like way two options, there's so many different ways to think about that, but sometimes it just means having a group over here, having a group over here, and seeing which ones overlap. And you can't really do that easily unless you're very organized, and I tried to help people stay organized.
Now, you might be looking at this move g5 and saying, wait a second. You're pushing pawns out on your king side. Aren't you about to castle short? And if you castle short, won't you have a very weak king? Now, the answer to all of those questions is undoubtedly yes, as my opponent plays a bit of an enigmatic move. But after the game, I'll unpack that a little bit further and explain why this is, in fact, justified. In many cases, the better you become at chess, the better you also become at strategically violating opening principles. Now,
so there's a point in enLIGHTen where people try to solve all the puzzles by getting rid of lights. So like, you see some lights here, get rid of them, get rid of them. Yeah, it's solving, get rid of them. Woo! But then there's a certain complexity level out here where people get stumped if they continually try to get rid of lights. And I'll just show you one right here. Now this one works because it goes into pinball. Where is it? Where is it? This one. So like, yeah, get rid of lights. Woo! Oh no. Oh, let me just get rid of these. Oh no. And you're like, oh no, and then they're just like, ah, but like that strategy stops working. You can't just get rid of lights all the time. Sometimes, even though it seems counterintuitive, you have to add lights. Or in cases like this, you have to add lights in order to get rid of this center dot. And then with that gone, you can do other things. But like, it's counterintuitive to people because they made an assumption. It's nothing that the game taught them. It's just something that they made a connection about and kind of were running with. So basically, the more complexities you learn, the more that you realize that the things that you thought were like rules or solid may not be so solid. But that's just why life's complex. You learn stuff that changes some things that you thought you knew and blah, 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 blah.
He's played knight d5. First question I ask myself, is he threatening anything? It might look like he's threatening my knight, but that knight is securely fastened. That's some airplane talk. It's securely defended by the queen. And so I can proceed with my main plan. Now,
cool. So what's cool about this is I did another daily challenge. Convert the grid into a familiar puzzle patterns. It's daily 2 again. This pattern in particular, I'll recreate it in explore mode. Something like that. Okay, stick. This is actually, no it's not. What am I doing? Yeah, cool. So this pattern is one where if you just kind of like start clicking on what you might think is there, you'll not solve it, right? Or whatever the goal is. But you're trying to unscramble. Oh, it's the wrong cursor anyway. It's not gonna be. I need to switch to this game. There we go. Okay, so this is the cursor. So what's cool about this is the cursor is different. That's what's special about enLIGHTen Gold. I reset everybody's learned strategies by changing the underlying rule that governs the gameplay. The reason why I highlighted this is to convert the grid into a familiar puzzle pattern. And he's like, first thing I ask myself is this piece threatening anything? If not, then I can proceed with my main plan. That means he has main plans, sub-plans, sub-checks, and conditionals in how he operates. And one thing that reminded me of is like when I'm solving for this one in particular, I remember I was like, well, are these two pieces interrupting anything that I'm doing over here? Can they be gotten rid of without threatening or interrupting? If they can, I can ignore them or click them and then proceed with my main plan, which was dealing with the cluster like that. That's exactly a perfect example of when you're playing enLIGHTen. Sometimes the lights look like they go together, sometimes they don't. You just have to evaluate, is this thing really supposed to be here? Like, is it really going to cause me trouble if I ignore it? Those are the kind of questions you should ask yourself.
am I attacking his knight? Not really, because if I capture his knight with either one of my pieces, he's just going to take back with a pawn. But in chess, it's very important to evaluate transformations. Whenever a piece has been captured with a pawn, you want to look at the fallout. And as he takes my knight, I'm going to recapture his. And the fallout.
So whenever you make a decision, the more advanced players look at what this decision means for the later decisions, not what it means in the short term. So in this case, for enLIGHTen Gold, I have this formation here. Yep. It's the same formation. And then you use the Hidden Shapes tool. You can see that there's a tile case in Hidden Shapes. This is what I call that tile case. What do you say? So what's the fallout gonna be? Yeah. So whenever you could just remove the tile case right now just by going clickety clickety. Oh. I should be able to remove it roughly by doing this, and it'll leave one dot behind. But the question I ask myself is, sure, I could just get rid of the shape, supposedly, but is that going to mess up everything else? What is going to be the transformed state of the board after I do something small? It's not just like, well, I did something in the corner. Okay, now what do we got here? Like, you should already be anticipating what's going to happen. And thinking about that before you make the move, because that's ultimately the reason why you're making the move, to win the game, to clear the board, to beat the other person in chess by capturing or pressuring the king. Therefore, why are any of your individual decisions ending on a short term, like, cool, just because I want this, just because I feel like it? Like, I know it's hard, but you should be trying to get the bigger picture and keep the bigger picture in mind always.
Fallout is going to be that he's opened up that G file. First of all, I've taken his bishop, so now I can put my rook on G8. And once his pawn leaves, the fastest way to evaluate whether or not you can take a pawn is by counting the number of attackers and defenders. If a pawn is being attacked, or any piece for that matter, is being attacked more times than it is being defended, you may take that piece or pawn in the absence of any other extenuating or indirect defenses.
So that is a methodology. He gave you a bunch of if conditionals, he gave you a criteria by which to evaluate the board, and he gave you a clear, actionable conclusion. Therefore, he's giving you a method. And even though the game has a hard time helping people develop that, like, I had all kinds of modes and ideas. I had this method maker. Oh, yeah, this is the thing I don't use at all because I took this out of the game, but I wanted people to try to think about their process in terms of steps. Then I wanted them to, whenever they reference a hashtag in any step, it flies all the way over to where that hashtag is, so you can kind of follow people's reasoning, right? People were supposed to be like building down their dots for all their hashtags, and then it goes horizontal when there's some kind of like lateral decision making. I don't know. I had some weird system here, but the basic idea was to get people more conscious about the steps that they're doing, and then looking at their total collection of steps. And if they only have 2 strategies, maybe those are the 2 best strategies. But if they need more, this is a really clear way to see, like, did you do the work? Are you even thinking about what it means to apply this? That kind of thing. But this whole idea didn't work. And what I did in the more advanced version of enLIGHTen that never came out was I gave people a method maker, and this allows them to script their own methods and rules that the game can interpret, so that you can hit play and the game does it and you're like, ha 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 ha, thank you game, kind of a thing. Yeah. But yeah, developing a method is the end result of all this hard work. That's why it's in my process, and that's why it's at the end of my process. You do all this work to develop methods. You do all that work thinking about all those fuzzy cases and special events and complexity, and then you're like, now that I've seen the board clearly and made the groups and defined the groups and sorted out all the properties, I can now say with certainty, fairly certain, that when you do this, if not that. Like, that tiny little refined statement is the result of so much work. The fact that he could just explain this to us, it makes perfect sense. Like, yeah, just count the number of things attacking the pawn, do a basic addition, and then make your decision. But people will not ever, most players will not ever get good enough to even derive this for themselves. They will be stuck looking at piece-to-piece movement. They'll be stuck not forming groups or copying other players. And even though it seems simple, believe me, it is gold. This is the golden result of his mastery and other people's understanding of chess in order to even explain that to us in the first place.
This is several effects. First of all, ladies, I'm winning that queen. This is a fork. Some people think that forks can only happen with knights. Not true. Forks can be delivered by any piece. Yes, even the king can deliver a fork. A fork is just a specialized way of saying, an attack against 2 pieces at once. It's also known as a double attack. That's the more generalized.
Again, showing mastery by having multiple names for something and being able to explain it and define it. There's a whole section in enLIGHTen where you're supposed to define the hashtags you make. Having words for the... If people recognize that having words for the puzzles is like, whoa, this changes everything. I'm now enjoying the experience instead of having no idea what's going on. I now have the power to talk about it instead of just going like, that one shape that, does the, Like, if people recognize that that is an important early aspect of enLIGHTen that works, it's the same exact design, it's the same exact principle for using hashtags. When you use hashtags, all of a sudden your methodologies have names. All of a sudden your strategies have intent. All of a sudden you have the language to communicate it to other people. And that is what gets the exchange of information to really accelerate. And until you do this, most people don't do this basically. But until you do this, you're just basically playing enLIGHTen without names. And people didn't like that game so much, let me tell you. The reason why nobody likes Lights Out now is because enLIGHTen didn't exist. And one of the first tools I made for enLIGHTen was to show people, make them more aware of patterns, because patterns is the fun of the game and learning in general. The fact that you can know something and anticipate it and understand it and see its possibilities and see where it can go and where it can't go. You have to recognize it as a pattern first. And if you do not, it's just lights. It's just a stupid grid with lights. Like, there's no point if you can't see that. And I tried to help people see that.
It turns out that I'm not even looking for his queen here. I'm looking for his king. And a very important thing to do.
I'm not even looking for his queen here. I'm looking for his king. The ability for top players to see clearly is because they determined ahead of time what's important and what's not important. They do less calculations because they are running strategies that don't need to calculate it. And I just liken that to a picture here in gold where even though you see, well, that wall spider's there. There, that wall spider's there, and I know this one collapses down to solve itself. So when I see that, I'm like, I'm not even looking at these lights. I'm looking at all the other lights. What can I do with all the other lights? And that's kind of like my way of. See, I can always. Itsy bitsy. Yep. So, like, breaking down the board, using hidden shapes, seeing possibilities, and it doesn't have to be right. It just has to be clear to you. Maybe tackling the wall spider here was a good idea. Maybe it wasn't. But for that moment, I had a very clear plan, and nothing else threw me off. Nothing. So, like, that's the kind of clarity. I mean, it's so funny watching Smash players. You're like, why are they doing that? That's such a bad move. They're just so unafraid. Like, how are they're going to get F-smashed in the face? I don't get it. And you're like, this is exactly what's happening. They've refined their mind to only worry about and or look for certain things. Sure, they may not win the tournament. Most people don't. MKLeo is the exception. So it's working for most of them, and it's working more for the people who are getting further in the tournament. So yeah, being able to do that, it's not about having a foolproof, airtight strategy, because that's not what fighting games are. It's about making these decisions for yourself, having internal consistency, and having the presence of mind to observe yourself and your opponent simultaneously while hitting buttons. Like, that's why fighting games are cool. But yeah, that was just one day, one challenge out of many. The whole week was a lot of fun. Getting to watch people play enLIGHTen Gold. When you first open the game, your puzzle mode has nothing in it, and people just like sat there for a second, and like, is this a glitch? And like hovering over buttons, like, what do I do? I'm like, what do you mean, what do you do? Now you have a state of the game that I had when I first made this game. There was nothing when I first made this game. All I had was Explore mode. And from playing around Explore mode, I basically created the entire game in enLIGHTen. So I wanted people to have a little bit of a taste of what that felt like. When you have to make all your own structure from scratch, when you have to name every single one of your own puzzles from scratch, when you have to draw connections yourself, like, what will you do and what kind of player will you be? That was fun. Any final words, questions, statements?
Nope.
Cool. there's always a lot to talk about with enLIGHTen. There's a lot of specific people. Shout out to everyone who even tried to pop up this week and play. I know it was a busy week. It's a holiday week, and things are crazy enough as it is. So we're incredibly lucky to even have people that like the game, play the game, even care at all. I mean, certainly I've put it online. This game has been in an open beta for 2.5 to 3 years, right? But only so many people even know about it. Only so many people care, or at least care to even let me know. So I'm fortunate enough to have the DO Discord community, people who are excited not only to learn about game design, but learning in general. That's just such a unique combination. And I'm glad they like the game. It's basically like so much of what we've already lived through. So many little subtle things that are the reason why we're doing all this in the first place. And we design a lot of games, we play a lot of games, we talk about games, and we also want other people to enjoy them like we enjoy them. So creating a puzzle game that tried to help other people enjoy puzzle games like I do just gives me a lot of hope that all this stuff we're teaching and preaching isn't just going to be like, well, only 0.0001% of gamers even care about that. You've been sticking your head in the hole in the sand for years, and now you're just crawling out and disappointed. Like, no, there's something here. This is something we believe in. This is something we talk about and try to refine and understand every single day. So yeah, I appreciate it. And who knows what's going to happen to enLIGHTen in the future. If you play the base version and you feel like you've made enough progress, you want to try gold, you can let me know. Otherwise, we hope to see this game get sort of a redesign, put on a more powerful, more accessible platform, potentially, and just hopefully share the most fun, most apparent parts of this game with more people. That's the goal. So thank you for watching. If you're curious about any of this, you can head over to our Discord community, designoriented.net. All the links you need to know for Twitch, YouTube, Twitter, Discord, all on designoriented.net. If you want to know more about this specific game, there'll be a link in the description, but it's designoriented.net/enLIGHTen game, all one word, and you'll find it. This is a page I was showing you before. It has a little video about the game, a download, my portfolio, what to expect from the game, just me talking about it, and quotes from people who played. So, fun. All right, guys, enjoy the rest of your day, evening, night, and we will see you next time. Until then, peace.
See you later.